put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The Phantom Architect. In the summer of 2009, a young Malaysian man walked into a Las Vegas nightclub with a briefcase containing $100,000 in cash. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't an athlete. He wasn't even 30 years old. But before the night ended, he would spend every dollar in that briefcase on champagne, tipping cocktail waitresses more than most Americans earn in a year. His name was Jho Low, and he was about to orchestrate the largest money laundering scheme in human history. A dark business story so vast, so intricate, that it would topple governments, finance Hollywood blockbusters, and leave a sovereign nation stripped of billions. This is the financial mystery of 1MDB, where wealth and power collided with greed so profound, it redefined corporate scandal. And it all began with a lie, wrapped in a national dream. Jho Low was born into privilege in Penang, Malaysia in 1981. His family owned shipping and garment businesses, comfortable but not extraordinary by billionaire standards. What set Jho apart wasn't his wealth, it was his hunger for it. At 13, he attended the prestigious Harrow School in England, where he learned something more valuable than mathematics or literature. He learned how to befriend the children of power, the sons of sultans, the heirs to oil fortunes, the future leaders of nations. These became his network, his currency, his weapon. By the time he reached Wharton Business School, Jho Low had mastered the art of proximity to power, understanding that in the shadows of the truly powerful, an ambitious man could build an empire invisible to scrutiny. In 2008, Malaysia stood at a crossroads. Najib Razak, the new prime minister, inherited a nation hungry for development, desperate to compete with Singapore and Hong Kong as an Asian financial hub. Najib needed a big idea, a transformative vision that would cement his legacy. And waiting in the shadows was Jho Low, a man with no official government position, but unlimited access to the prime minister's inner circle. Low presented Najib with a concept: One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB, a sovereign wealth fund that would invest strategically in energy, real estate, and tourism to accelerate Malaysia's development. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it was a trapdoor. The business documentary of 1MDB would reveal not a nation's rise, but its systematic pillaging by a man who understood that the greatest heists aren't committed with guns. They're committed with PowerPoint presentations and government seals. 1MD, launched in 2009 with $1 billion in capital, backed by government guarantees that made its bonds irresistible to international investors. Jho Low positioned himself as the unofficial advisor, the deal-maker who could open doors in Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds and connect Malaysian ambitions to Abu Dhabi capital. His first masterstroke came quickly. 1MDB would partner with PetroSaudi International, a Saudi oil company, to create a joint venture worth billions. The deal was structured with dizzying complexity, layers of subsidiaries, offshore accounts, and shell companies that made tracking money nearly impossible. In September 2009, 1MDB wired $1 billion to what it believed was the joint venture account. Within hours of the transfer, $700 million vanished into accounts controlled by Jho Low and his associates. The money never went to oil development. It went to Swiss bank accounts, to shell companies in the Seychelles, to a labyrinth designed specifically for one purpose: to make stolen money untraceable. This wasn't entrepreneurship secrets. This was financial sorcery, the dark alchemy of turning public funds into private jets. What Jho Low understood better than perhaps anyone in the history of money laundering was the power of spectacle. Stealing billions means nothing if you can't spend them, and spending them means nothing if you attract suspicion. His solution was counterintuitive but brilliant. Spend so lavishly, so publicly, so absurdly, that the spending itself becomes your disguise. Throughout 2010 and 2011, Low became a fixture in the world's most exclusive nightclubs. One Oak in New York, Avenue in Los Angeles, Tramp in London. He regularly spent $1 million per night, ordering $2,000 bottles of champagne by the crate, tipping staff $100,000, hosting parties where Leonardo DiCaprio, Paris Hilton, and Lindsay Lohan danced until dawn. He dated Miranda Kerr, gifting her $8 million in jewelry. He gambled millions in Las Vegas, once losing $2 million in a single night of blackjack without flinching. To the world, he was a mysterious Malaysian billionaire, a prince of some unspecified oil fortune. In truth, every dollar came from Malaysia's treasury, from pensions and development funds meant to build hospitals and schools. The business crime he committed wasn't just theft. It was theater, a performance so grand that it blinded investigators to the mechanism beneath. But the real genius of Jho Low's scheme lay in its complexity and its respectability. He didn't just steal money and spend it, he laundered it through the global financial system's most prestigious institutions. Goldman Sachs, the crown jewel of Wall Street, became his accomplice, wittingly or not. Between 2012 and 2013, Goldman arranged 3 bond offerings for 1 MDB, raising $6.5 billion, ostensibly for energy projects and real estate development. For these services, Goldman earned $600 million in fees, an astronomical rate that should have triggered every compliance alarm. Standard fees for such work run between 1% and 2%. Goldman charged nearly 10%. Why? Because hidden in the complex deal structures were kickbacks, bribes, and stolen funds flowing to Jho Low and Malaysian officials, including the Prime Minister himself. Of the $6.5 billion raised, approximately $4.5 billion was diverted, stolen, laundered through shell companies in Singapore, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the British Virgin Islands. The money traveled through so many accounts, so many jurisdictions, that tracking it required a multinational investigation spanning years. This was the rise and fall, not just of one man, but of the very systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of corporate scandal. Systems that failed because greed doesn't recognize borders, and neither did Jho Low's ambition. And then, in the shadows of this financial empire, something even darker emerged. Something that would prove that the 1 MDB scandal wasn't just about money, but about power so absolute it could purchase dreams themselves. In 2012, Jho Low met Riza Aziz, the stepson of Prime Minister Najib Razak, an aspiring film producer with Hollywood ambitions, but no capital to realize them. Low had a solution. He would finance Riza's production company, Red Granite Pictures, using 1 MDB funds disguised as legitimate investments from an Emirati oil concern. Over the next 3 years, Red Granite produced 3 films, including The Wolf of Wall Street, Martin Scorsese's dark business thriller about excess, greed, and fraud, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. The irony was exquisite and terrible. A film about financial fraud was being financed by one of history's greatest financial frauds. Over $100 million in stolen Malaysian public funds went into the movie. Jho Low attended the premiere, photographed with DiCaprio and Scorsese, a thief celebrating a movie about thieves, hidden in plain sight among Hollywood's elite. He even gifted DiCaprio a Picasso painting worth millions and a 3.2 million Basquiat, all purchased with looted money. The FBI would later seize these assets, but for years they sat in DiCaprio's collection, stolen goods disguised as legitimate art. This wasn't just money laundering, this was cultural colonization, the theft of a nation's future to purchase tickets to parties and credits on movie screens. By 2013, 1MDB was drowning in debt. The fund had borrowed billions but generated almost no revenue. The promised investments in energy and real estate existed mostly on paper, elaborate fictions designed to justify bond offerings and bank loans. The fund couldn't meet its debt obligations, requiring the Malaysian government to pump in taxpayer money to prevent default. Questions began to surface in Malaysia's parliament and press. Where were the investment returns? Why was 1MDB so secretive about its partnerships? Who was this Jho Low character, with no official role, but apparent control over billions? The answers were trapped in a maze of offshore accounts and legal threats. 1MDB's leadership claimed commercial sensitivity, invoking secrecy laws that prevented scrutiny. Prime Minister Najib defended the fund as essential to Malaysia's development, even as evidence mounted that it was a vehicle for systematic theft. Behind closed doors, panic was setting in. Jho Low and his co-conspirators began moving money more frantically, purchasing real estate in New York, London, and Los Angeles, converting cash into hard assets that could survive scrutiny. Low bought a $30 million penthouse in Manhattan, a $39 million mansion in Los Angeles, and a $250 million yacht named Equanimity. At the time, one of the most expensive private yachts ever built. Each purchase was another thread in the web, another data point for investigators who were slowly, methodically, piecing together the greatest money and greed scandal of the modern era. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: journalism. In 2015, a small investigative outlet called the Sarawak Report, run by British journalist Claire Rucastle-Brown, began publishing leaked documents from inside 1MDB. The documents revealed secret transactions, mysterious partners, and most damningly, wire transfers showing hundreds of millions of dollars flowing into Prime Minister Najib's personal bank accounts. Malaysia's government attempted to silence the reporting, blocking the website domestically and threatening legal action. But the information had escaped. The Wall Street Journal picked up the story, publishing investigations that traced $681 million from 1MDB to Najib's accounts just before a critical election. Najib claimed the money was a legal donation from a Saudi royal, a claim that would later be proven false. The scandal exploded into international news, a real-life business story that had everything: billionaire secrets, political corruption, Hollywood glamour, and a scheme so audacious it seemed fictional. Protests erupted in Kuala Lumpur. Malaysians demanded answers, demanded accountability, demanded the return of stolen billions. But the machinery of power doesn't surrender easily, and Najib's government fought back with arrests, investigations into investigators, and legal maneuvers designed to run out the clock. What they couldn't control was the international response. The United States Department of Justice, tracking money laundered through American banks and assets on American soil, launched the largest kleptocracy investigation in its history. In 2016, the DOJ filed civil forfeiture complaints seeking over $1 billion in assets linked to 1MDB, naming Jho Low, Riza Aziz, and unnamed Malaysian official one, a clear reference to Najib. The complaints laid out the scheme in devastating detail: how money moved from Malaysia to shell companies, from shell companies to luxury purchases, from legitimate transactions to bribes that kept the entire operation running. Switzerland, Singapore, and Luxembourg opened their own investigations, freezing accounts and seizing assets. The web that Jho Low had spun so carefully began to unravel. Jurisdiction by jurisdiction, bank account by bank account. Goldman Sachs executives were charged, including a senior partner who had earned $200 million from the 1MDB deals and used it to purchase a 10,000-square-foot Manhattan townhouse and finance a Scorsese film, proving that corruption had infected even Wall Street's most elite corridors. The stock market secrets and financial mystery at the heart of 1MDB revealed something darker than fraud. It revealed how easily the global financial system could be weaponized by someone who understood its vulnerabilities. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. The revelation that transforms this from a tale of money laundering into something more sinister. Murder may have entered the equation. In 2015, Kevin Marias, a Malaysian deputy public prosecutor investigating 1MDB, disappeared while driving home from work. His body was found weeks later, sealed in a concrete-filled drum at the bottom of a swamp. 7 men were arrested and convicted, claiming they were hired guns paid to carry out the killing. But who hired them? That question remains officially unanswered, though Marias had been preparing charges related to 1MDB before his death. Then, in 2017, Hussein Najadi, a Malaysian Swiss banker who had spoken out about financial irregularities and called for investigations into government corruption, was shot dead in broad daylight in Kuala Lumpur. His son publicly accused the government of orchestrating the killing to silence a critic. No one has been convicted. The official investigations went nowhere. And perhaps most chilling of all, Ambank founder Hussein Ahmad Najadi had met with opposition leaders discussing financial evidence just before his murder. Were these connected to 1MDB? The business scandal documentary evidence suggests they knew too much, asked too many questions, threatened too many powerful people. The wealth and power at stake wasn't just measured in billions. It was measured in the willingness to silence those who threatened to expose it. Jho Low's empire wasn't just built on fraud. It was potentially protected by violence. By 2018, the political ground had shifted beneath Najib's feet. Malaysian voters, outraged by the 1MDB scandal and years of denied accountability, did something unprecedented. They voted out the ruling coalition that had governed Malaysia since independence. Mahathir Mohamad, the 92-year-old former prime minister who came out of retirement specifically to challenge Najib, swept to victory with a mandate to recover the stolen billions and prosecute the guilty. Within weeks, Najib was arrested and charged with corruption, money laundering, and abuse of power. His wife, Rosma Mansor, was arrested separately, her homes raided and found to contain 567 handbags, 423 watches, and $28 million in cash and jewelry, spoils of a corporate scandal that had enriched the ruling family while ordinary Malaysians struggled. In 2020, Najib was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison, though he remains free pending appeals in a legal process that may last years. But the true architect of the scheme remained untouchable. Jho Low had disappeared. Tracking Jho Low became an international manhunt spanning continents and jurisdictions. After the initial investigations went public in 2015, Low fled Malaysia, moving between Hong Kong, Macau, and China. Interpol issued a red notice, an international wanted alert. The FBI placed him on their most wanted list for money laundering. Yet he remained ghost, protected by the same networks of wealth and influence he had cultivated for years. Reports placed him in Shanghai, in Thailand, possibly in Dubai. His assets were seized globally: the Manhattan penthouse, the Los Angeles mansion, the yacht Equanimity captured in Indonesia, and auctioned for $126 million. His art collection, Monet, Basquiat, Picasso, seized and valued at hundreds of millions. The business thriller had entered its chase sequence. But unlike Hollywood endings, this one remained unresolved. Some investigators believe China is harboring him, either for diplomatic leverage or because he still has connections to politically influential figures. Others suggest he underwent plastic surgery and lives under an assumed identity, his billions slowly drained through proxies and cryptocurrency. As of today, Jho Low has never faced trial, never spent a day in prison, never been forced to account for what he took. The full cost of the 1MDB scandal may never be calculated with precision, but estimates place the stolen amount at $4.5 billion, making it the largest money laundering operation in history. Malaysia's government negotiated settlements with Goldman Sachs, $2.9 billion, with Swiss banks, with Singapore institutions, clawing back what it could from frozen accounts and seized assets. But billions remain unrecovered, hidden in complex structures that may take decades to unwind or may never surface at all. The Malaysian people paid in delayed development, in schools not built, in hospitals underfunded, in a generation's worth of economic growth sacrificed to feed one man's appetite for luxury and a government's corruption. Goldman Sachs, beyond financial penalties, suffered profound reputational damage, its century-old brand tarnished by association with kleptocracy, and a willingness to ignore obvious red flags when fees were sufficiently lucrative. The dark business story of 1MDB became a case study in business schools worldwide, not as inspiration but as warning, a textbook example of what happens when financial systems prioritize profit over principle, when governments prioritize power over people. What made Jho Low's scheme so effective wasn't just its complexity, it was its understanding of human psychology and institutional weakness. He recognized that legitimate financial institutions want to believe their clients are legitimate, that compliance officers can be overwhelmed by paperwork, that lawyers and bankers prefer not to ask uncomfortable questions when fees are extraordinary. He understood that sovereign wealth funds carry an aura of respectability that discourages scrutiny, that government seals open doors closed to ordinary criminals. He weaponized complexity itself, building structures so elaborate that unwinding them required specialized forensic accountants working for years. And perhaps most importantly, he understood spectacle, that living like a billionaire publicly makes you seem like a billionaire legitimately, that access to celebrities and politicians creates a self-reinforcing credibility that shields you from investigation until it's too late. These billionaire secrets aren't really secrets at all. They're exploitations of known vulnerabilities in systems we collectively choose not to fix, because those same vulnerabilities serve legitimate wealthy people too. The lessons of 1MDB extend far beyond one man's greed or one country's corruption. They reveal fundamental truths about modern wealth and power that remain uncomfortable to acknowledge. First, the global financial system is designed for opacity, not transparency, because opacity serves the powerful. Shell companies, offshore accounts, and complex ownership structures exist not primarily for criminals, but for legitimate tax avoidance and privacy for the wealthy. Jho Low simply used tools built for legal purposes toward illegal ends. Second, financial institutions will prioritize profits over compliance until the penalties for failure exceed the profits from success. And currently they don't. Goldman's $2.9 billion settlement sounds massive until you realize the firm earned $600 million in fees from 1MDB alone. And the settlement was paid by shareholders, not the executives who approved the deals. Third, sovereign immunity and diplomatic complexity create enforcement vacuums where accountability goes to die. The money crossed borders effortlessly. The prosecutions cannot. And finally, the distance between legitimate wealth and criminal wealth is often nothing more than paperwork and political connections, a line so thin that crossing it is sometimes imperceptible, even to those doing the crossing. Today, Malaysia continues its recovery, but the scars remain deep. The country's credit rating was damaged, requiring years of fiscal discipline to restore international confidence. 1MDB itself was dissolved, its remaining assets sold off to repay debts. Najib's corruption trial continues through appeals, a slow-motion reckoning that many fear may never reach true conclusion, given Malaysia's complex politics and the former PM's continued influence. The Mahathir government that promised accountability has itself cycled out of power, replaced by coalitions involving some of the same political actors who enabled 1MDB's creation. The risk remains that as attention fades, as the scandal becomes historical rather than immediate, that accountability will fade too, replaced by political accommodations and pardons, by justice delayed until it becomes justice denied. This pattern repeats globally. Massive financial crimes produce headlines and investigations, but rarely produce proportionate punishment, because the systems designed to prevent and punish such crimes are run by the same class of people who benefit from those crimes, remaining prosecutable only at the margins. The cultural impact of 1MDB extended in unexpected directions, reshaping how we understand the intersection of wealth, power, and entertainment. Hollywood, which had unknowingly been financed by stolen money, was forced to confront its complicity in money laundering. Not through intent, but through willful ignorance about funding sources. Red granite pictures dissolved. Leonardo DiCaprio returned the gifted artwork and cooperated with investigators, escaping prosecution, but carrying the taint of association. The Picasso, the Basquiat, the Monet paintings, all seized and auctioned, their proceeds returned to Malaysia's treasury. But questions lingered. How many other films, how many other art purchases, how many other luxury goods trades are funded by looted wealth? The answer is almost certainly many, because the due diligence required to prevent such transactions would be so onerous that it would slow commerce to an unacceptable pace for the wealthy. We live in a global economy that has chosen speed and privacy over security and accountability, and 1MDB is the price we pay for that choice. Standing here in 2024, nearly a decade after the scandal broke, the ultimate question remains unanswered. Where is Jho Low? Intelligence reports place him in China, possibly under state protection as leverage in diplomatic negotiations, or as insurance against his cooperation with Western investigators. He may have hundreds of millions still hidden, accessible through cryptocurrency, or offshore structures not yet discovered. Or he may be nearly broke, his empire liquidated, living on whatever fraction he managed to hide from international asset seizures. We may never know. What we do know is that he orchestrated the largest theft in modern history, that he did it by exploiting the very systems designed to prevent it, that he lived like a king on stolen money while his country's poor got poorer, and that he has never faced justice for any of it. The rise and fall narrative we expect from business crime stories hasn't completed. There has been a rise, a revelation, but no true fall. Jho Low remains free somewhere, a ghost haunting the system he gamed so successfully. The 1MDB scandal forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of wealth in the 21st century. We live in an age where trillions of dollars move across borders daily, where financial products are deliberately designed to be incomprehensible to regulators, where the people who write the rules governing money are often the same people who benefit from those rules being complex and difficult to enforce. Jho Low didn't invent money laundering. It's been practiced for centuries. What he did was perfect it for the modern age, understanding that in an interconnected global economy with inconsistent regulations and enforcement, a sufficiently determined thief with the right connections can steal billions and vanish into the infrastructure itself. The real scandal isn't just what he did. It's how easy it was, how many supposedly sophisticated institutions failed to stop him, how much of the money remains unrecovered, and how unlikely it is that the systems enabling his theft have been fundamentally reformed. In the end, the dark business story of 1MDB and Jho Low is a mirror held up to global capitalism itself, and the reflection is far from flattering. It shows us a world where stolen money and legitimate money flow through the same channels, where the difference between a respected financier and a wanted criminal can be merely a matter of paperwork quality and political protection, where justice remains negotiable if you're wealthy enough and connected enough. It reveals that the real business thriller isn't happening in boardrooms or on trading floors. It's happening in the shadows between jurisdictions, in the legal gray zones where enforcement dies and accountability evaporates. The greatest mystery of 1MDB isn't how Jho Low stole $4.5 billion. The documents explain that in excruciating detail. The mystery is why we've built a global financial system that makes such thefts possible, profitable, and rarely punished. And so we return to where we began. A young man in a nightclub with a briefcase full of cash, spending like there's no tomorrow. But now we know the truth that was hidden that night in Las Vegas. That money didn't belong to him. It belonged to teachers and doctors, to farmers and factory workers, to every Malaysian citizen whose government stole their future to finance one man's fantasy. Every bottle of champagne, every tipped dollar, every private jet and penthouse and yacht. All of it was built on lies so vast, they required the complicity of nations to sustain. Jho Low proved something terrifying about money and greed in the modern world, that with enough audacity, enough connections, and enough understanding of how the system actually works beneath its public face, you can steal billions in broad daylight, and the world will call you a billionaire, until the day it doesn't. And even then, if you've planned carefully enough, you might never pay the price. That briefcase is empty now, seized by investigators years ago. But somewhere, somehow, Jho Low carries another one, and we may never know what's inside. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.